Hi, this is a video about how to make tile sets for LAN-Caster game engine. We're going to cover several topics, mostly about how to specifically do it for the LAN-Caster game engine. There's lots of other topics around creating pixel art and tile sheets and those things, and there's lots of great resources online. So I'll touch on some of that and point to some of those, but we're going to more concentrate on the specifics of what's needed for LAN-Caster. So let's start with the tileset format. The tileset format that we use is the format used by Tile that is saved in a JSON format. So within within Tiled, if you look at a tile sheet, what you get is, let me get back to a tile sheet here. For instance, this is a saw tile sheet. This is a nice simple one. And what you'll see here is a series of tiles. And we'll look at the soldier as well. Again, a series of tiles. We'll get into what some of the other film strip icons mean and such. And the way these get used in Tiled is to layer onto maps. And we'll look at this more at the end, but when we look at a map here, and this is a map from the demo game, all the graphics you see are actually tiles, and they're used in a couple different ways, either on a tile layer or a tile object, but we'll talk about that. So this is the goal, is to make this, and to do this we want to break this down into its individual parts. So if you go look at the mountain tile sheet, what you see is a bunch of individual pieces that get structured together to make this map that's all linked together. So this is a bit of a skill to generate these. I certainly suggest, if you are interested in making tile sheets, that you go online, look for other people's tile sheets, look at how they've done them, and look at what the tile sheet looks like, and look at what they've been able to create with the tile sheet. Because, looking at this tile sheet, at first glance, you go, what can I do with this? Well, here's an example of what you could do with it. So it's often a little counterintuitive. Sometimes tile sheets can be very powerful with the way they've structured their graphics. And there's other kinds of tile sheets. We see the animated saw here, and it's a tile sheet with the animated saws. We see the soldier here, which, in the game, we only ever think we see one soldier, but actually all of these icons end up getting used to animate that soldier. So it's a different use of a tile sheet. Okay. That's just a quick introduction. But whenever we start with a tile sheet, we always want to start with the image file. I'm going to suggest that for the uses in LAN-Caster that you use PNG files. There are some other options, but PNG files are going to be the easiest. They're the ones that are going to work with transparency correctly. LAN-Caster uses Pygame as the underlying graphics library to do the rendering. And that library likes working with PNGs very much, so it's a good choice. It works well in Tiled, it works well with Pygame. So let's just talk about where you might get some of these images or how you might make them. So the other topic, which is a good thing to talk about right now, is also how to give credit. So if you go and get some graphics off the internet somewhere, it's important, one, that you have the right to do so. Make sure that you know the license for it. Is it some sort of public license where it's in the public domain where you can just use it? And regardless of whether it says you have to give credit or not, I suggest you give credit. And let's look at how we do that for the demo game. So in the demo game, and maybe I'll just close some of this up just to make it tidy. So I'm sitting in the LAN-Caster folder here. I'm looking in the source folder and then the demo game. And in the demo game, there is a docs folder. I'm just going to close some of this up. So in the docs folder of the demo game, there's a file called credits. And that's what we're looking at here. So you can see there's a few credits here. This is the author of the demo game itself, so that's me. There's some image credits, so credits for the different images that we've used. And then there's also font credits. So you can put whatever you want in this file. There's no format for this credits file, but if you're pulling resources off the internet, make sure you're allowed to be using them. And make sure that you give credit. It's very important that you do so. So for example, if we look at some of these, let me grab an example of this one. So the fantasy tile set. So the magic wand that you see and the bomb that you see in the game, in the demo game, they are from this tile set. Let me just pop this into a browser. There we go. So you'll see that this is a site called opengameart.org, and there's a tile sheet there. And some of the other ones, the main look of the upper two maps in the game are actually from this tile sheet that's available freely online. Other ones like the saw were ones that had to be created from just an icon, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So there's several resources online. You can certainly look at that credits file to get some idea. You can Google some of the terminology. You can look up how to make your own pixel art. Let's talk for a second about how to do that. So you're going to create this in some sort of program like GIMP or Photoshop. There's several other options out there. There's programs that specifically create pixel art. But I mean, I'm just going to show an example in GIMP here for today. So if we look at the image file, so this is the PNG file. Sorry, I should point out that if we go back to the LAN-Caster directory and we go into the source directory and we go into the demo game, there's two folders that I'm talking about a lot. There's the images folder and there's the Tilesets folder. So the images folder is where you're going to start. This is where you're going to put your tileset image. So there is that fantasy PNG tileset. Well, I shouldn't say tileset, I should say the image. That's the image for the tileset. This is where the saw lives. Just going to try and close that. So what we want to do is make sure that we are happy with how the tile set looks. Now, a few of the requirements here, tile sets typically have a lot of transparency, so make sure your transparency is correct. The saw was an interesting one. So the saw was just a single picture when I found it online. And it was just a single saw. It was quite large. It was about, I think, 1,000 pixels by 1,000 pixels. And I wanted a saw that was 32 pixels by 32 and that rotated. So what I created was a 32 pixel by however long I wanted to be. In fact, in this case, I didn't even use all my pixels. And I divided it up. So let me do view. I think I have to do configure grid. Configure grid to be 32 pixels by 32 pixels. This will just help us see things. And let's turn the grid on. Show grid. Oops, show grid. There we go. So what I just turned on was grid there was 32 pixels by 32 pixels, so you can see how it's going to be divided up when we bring it into Tiled and into LAN-Caster. So the image is just one image, but it is important that things are aligned. Now, one of the things that helps as you're working on these tiles, I find, is actually have your grid be half the size of your tile. So if I do that, so if I configure grid, so these tiles are supposed to be 32 pixels by 32, so I'm just going to make my grid 16 by 16. And that now tells me where the center of each tile is. So that's how I'm able to align the center of the saw. Also, don't be afraid to zoom in. I'm at 400%, but you could zoom in even more. If we're working on this, because we're working with very small images. And that's how you can make sure things are aligned. And yeah, as you can see, this saw slowly rotates in these different images. And I did that just by using the rotation tool and slowly rotating it. It's good to also make these images large first and then scale them down after you've done the rotation and things, because you lose information each time you reduce the size, each time you rotate. So working with more pixels and then making it smaller later often helps. Anyways, I'm not going to get into all the details of how to use these programs. Just so you know, you can use these. For instance, if you wanted to take the soldier and change his clothing or change him into a different character, you could certainly do that here, where you could just edit this tile map and make it into a totally new tile map as opposed to starting from scratch. Certainly, that's one approach to this. In the case of the demo, by the way, the tile size for the soldier is 64 by 64. So our players are actually 64 by 64 tiles, and the terrain and things we're using for the ground and the decorating are 32 by 32 pixel tiles. But that's a very common practice to do that. It's not a bad idea, but there's lots of other options available. All right. So that's just a little bit of how to do that. Again, you're saving these as PNG. You're saving them with transparency. I'm not going to go into all sorts of detail on that. But once you've got one of these images, and you'll see certainly for the demo, a lot of these just came straight off the internet. I didn't have to do anything with them. They came as PNGs. I think a couple of them I had to convert to PNGs, but it was easy to do. So we want to actually create a tileset file. So a tileset file, what it looks like. So if I go back into my demo game and I go into the Tilesets folder, you'll see I have a JSON file. And every JSON file actually corresponds to one of these PNG files. So we've been looking at the mountain image. So if I go look at the mountains JSON file, you see I have a very simple JSON file. Maybe I'll just make that a little bit bigger, make sure you can read it. So this is the mountains.json. It's referencing the image. It has the image height. It tells me the size of my tile is 32 pixels by 32 pixels. So most of this is done by Tiled for you, but there's a few things you do need to input. And maybe what I'll do is I'll recreate this for you in Tile, just so you see how to do it. Now, there are some restrictions on doing this. And what I'll do is before I make it, I'll actually show you what those are. So if we go back to our web browser, so I'm in the LAN-Caster GitHub now, and I'm under the Create a Game link. And under Create a Game, if we scroll down, we're going to go past File Organization. And we're going to look at data creation in Tiled. And there's a list of supported features. And specifically, what you'll see in blue that I've highlighted is the tileset format. So our tileset format has to be based on a tileset image. So that's what we've been looking at, tileset images. And we also support tile animations. We also support custom properties in the tilesets and the tiles themselves. So we'll talk about all these things. But if you ever want to know what's supported, because there are some other options, this is the only things about Tilesets that Tile does that LAN-Caster will also support. So let's go through this process. So if I wanted to create a new tile set, I can say new tile set. And it's tileset based on a tileset image. That's the default. So the collection of images won't work for LAN-Caster. So based on tileset image. So the first thing to do actually is to find your tileset. So actually I'm in the engine test. Let me go back to the demo here. Demo images. Let me find that mountains tileset. And there it is. And now the tileset's already been named mountains. That's fine. I'm going to change that because I already have a mountains tileset and it'll conflict. So I'm going to call it mountains 2. Because I've used a PNG file and because I have set it up properly with transparency, I don't need to say anything about a transparent color. It is by far better to have the transparency in your image as we've done. Now, we see something's wrong here. We see 64 pixels by 64. So we know that our tiles are 32 by 32. Whoops, 32 by 32. And then I'm going to save it. So I'm in my demo Tilesets folder. So LAN-Caster, source, demo is my game. Tilesets is my tileset folder. And it's going to call it Mountains 2 automatically because that is what I named it. I'm going to say save. And now I've got my mountains tile set. So that is saved. I can then turn around and use that on my maps. It's good to go. Nothing else to do. Now, there are some other features, however, or things you can apply to tiles. The first one is animation. The second one is doing what we call character tiles, which is a step above animations. And then also important is applying some properties around anchor points. So let's talk about each of those. So to start with, let's talk about tile animations. And I'm actually going to use the saw for this one. So if we look at the saw, I mean, obviously it's not animated when we look at it here. What we see is those individual images, and they're each slightly rotated from one another. And if we look at the under map, we actually see that, well, look, at least the saw is rotated. Now, or is rotating on its own. Now, this is something that is a display item. And by that in LAN-Caster, I mean it's done by the client. So the server never knows about animated tiles. The server doesn't care about animated tiles. It's irrelevant to it. So this is data that's used by the client. And what we want to do is actually tell it how to animate these these tiles. So if we go back and look, we were looking at the mountains.json file for the tile set. It's very, very simple. There's almost nothing there. If we go look at saw trap, which is a JSON file, we actually see a little bit more data. So what we see there is we see that there is an animation. And I won't talk too much about the ID, but we see that tile ID 0 has an animation with these particular other tiles within itself. So let's look at all that and let's recreate this. So if we go back to the saw trap, we actually see that this is tile 0. Now you see ID 0, ID 1, ID 2, 3, 4. And if we look at a tile set that is got more tiles, again, the top left is tile 0, the next one to the right is tile 1, and then when we get back to the beginning, we're at tile 12, 13, 14, and so on, and then tile 24, 25, 26. So your tile numbers go in that order from top left to the right and then down. So they all have numbers. You typically don't have to worry too much about that, but it is something to be aware of, that the tiles are numbered within a tile set. They're also numbered within a map, which uses a different numbering system, but right now we're just going to talk about tiles within a tile set. So if we go back to our saw trap and we look at the one that's done, so this one actually has a film strip. That means, hey, this is animated. And we click on the film camera, this will show us the animation. So down here at the bottom left, we see our animation. And then what we do is we see all the different saws that are done and how long each one is shown for. So for 30 milliseconds, this saw blade is shown. And then after that, this saw blade is shown. Now, it's important to realize what 30 milliseconds is. So that's 30 thousandths of a second. So if you were to put 1 millisecond here, it means the client would have to animate this 1,000 times a second. And that is not going to work. That's going to make the client have to constantly be redrawing the screen. So you do want to be careful how fast you animate. This is actually quite a fast animation. You'll see for some other animations with the character that they're not that fast. So you do want to be careful and think about how many times a second the screen has to be updated if you're going to have an animation like this. Okay, but let's do this ourselves from scratch. So I'm just going to animate randomly another. So I'm going to say that this tile is the one I want to animate. And I'm just going to do this again from scratch. So I've clicked the tile I want to animate. I've clicked the animate button and I get the blank. So the first thing I'm going to do, well, you know what? I'm going to do it backwards. So I'm just going to take the tiles I want to animate. Oh, you know what? I don't want this to be 500. I actually wanted this to be 30. So you can hand edit these now. So that's 30. That one's 30. And now that I've set it 30 up here, I can actually just drag them in. And as you see, as I drag them in, it's starting to animate down below. Now let's say I dragged in a black line, I stuck it in the middle there. Now you're going to see that black line up here. Supposing I set this black line to be 300 milliseconds. And then we see our animation change again. So that's all there is to animated tiles. They're just a list of tiles that play in a loop. They have timing in milliseconds. And that's it. There's no particular rocket science to it. So that is how the saw has been animated. And now that's done, I could save my tile set. And actually maybe I'll do that just to show you. So if I save my tile set, and I go back and look, and now you'll see that tile 3 has an animation link to it now with several tiles, and there's my 300 milliseconds, there's my 30 milliseconds, and the different tiles to be shown. Again, typically you don't need to work with the JSON file, but it's just useful to know that it's there. All right, so that's tile animation. You see it quite a bit in the game. Actually, if I run the game and we have a look, you'll see it in several places. Let me run the demo here. So you'll certainly see the chickens, they're walking. That's a tile animation. You will see if I get onto anybody except the block, the soldier, there's the soldier walking. And also you'll see that these square tiles up here on the top island, they flip back and forth. Again, that's a tile animation. So the server is completely unaware of all of this animation. It's all being done by the client. And maybe that's a good point. Maybe I should, let me close this and close these. Let me run the demo in test mode just so I can get around quicker. Okay, and which? So I just wanted to jump into test mode here just to distinguish something. So if we look at the saws, you can see the saws are rotating. So the rotation of the saws is a tile animation, but the saws moving left and right, and we'll talk about this at the end, those are tile objects that are actually sliding back and forth. So the server is actually sliding those back and forth. So the animation of the saw rotating is being done by the client, but the actual movement of the saw left to right, that's something the server needs to know about, because the server needs to know when a player is being hit by a saw. So because of that, the server has to actually move the saw left to right. So you can't do that with a tile animation. And typically that would be a very huge tile, because tiles typically, from an animation perspective, aren't moving their location. All right, let's leave that running and let's pop back to here. Actually, sorry, let's pop back to here. So that's animated tiles. There's a manual online as well for tile that talks about that, and you're welcome to have a look at that. Now, let's talk about some very specialized things like character tiles. So there are times in LAN-Caster where you want a character to be animated. Now, as I said, what we're looking at here is some tile animation, but we're also looking at some other things. So both the chicken and the soldier and the princess are all character tiles. And what it is, it's a special configuration of both animated tiles and some properties. So I'm just going to look at the soldier first. So let me pop into that. So if I go look at the soldier tile, what we see is four different animated tiles. So if I click on that one and look at it, and we look down here, that's a soldier walking away animation. Soldier walking to the left, soldier walking towards us, and soldier walking to the right. So there's four animations. We also have a soldier standing still, looking away, looking to the left, looking at us, looking to the right. And if we look in the game, we see all of these appear. So soldier walking to the right, soldier standing to the right. Soldier walking to the left, standing to the left. Soldier walking down, soldier standing still, facing down. Soldier walking up, soldier facing up, standing still. And the chicken's doing the same thing. So as the chicken follows me around, the chicken's doing exactly the same thing. He's also a character animation. So we need to tell LAN-Caster how to do this. So there's two steps. The first one is, once you have your tiles animated, you need to pick one tile as being your core tile, the tile you're actually going to use. So in this case, in this tile set, I've chosen the soldier facing me, standing still. And this is just by standard. This is the tile I've used for the chicken and the princess and the soldier. I mean, you can pick any tile, it doesn't matter, but you need to pick one. And this is a character tile. And what you saw on the left here is a bunch of properties. So the other tiles don't have properties. This one does. Now, when we use this tile set in the game and we want to use the soldier, we're going to use this tile when we design it in tiled. So for instance, if I go look at the start map and I go look at this tile that I've used, I see it's ID 7 is the tile. And if I go look there, I see, oh, actually it's 18. Hold on, let me figure that out. Oh, because again, map tile IDs are different than tiled tile ID. So I'm not going to actually see it there. But I assure you that this is the same tile. So when I went here and I went to soldier and I decided to drag a tile object in, let me actually do it here. So I think that is, yeah, insert tile. So if I insert a tile object, I'm going to insert that tile object. If I used any other ones, I would not get the character animation. So again, I'm going to set some parameters I'll talk about in a moment, and I'm going to make sure to use that particular tile when I want to create my character. And almost always your characters are going to be on your sprite layer. I don't think there's any use to use character tiles on any other layer. So we're almost talking about sprites, but I'll cover that more in the video about maps. All right, so our soldier. How do you add a property in tiles for the first thing? So I've got this particular tile selected. Now remember, there are tile set properties and there are tile properties. So make sure you click on the tile so you're on the particular tile's property. The tile type is set to character. So that's the first step for the property to set. And then you need to set all of these. Now, how you add a property name, I'm just going to put ABC as a name. And in this case, these are all ints as their type. Say OK, and there's my new property, and then I can put some value in there. So what I've done, let me delete that one just as a remove. Okay, so what I've done is I've added moving down, moving left, moving right, moving up, all these property names, and then a number. So moving down is 19. So let's find 19 here. So there's 19, there's tile 19. So when the character is moving down, the client will actually use tile 19. When the character is moving left, the client will actually display tile 10. Now, tile 10 is animated, so when it's moving left, it'll be animated. But the server never changes this tile. So the server never has to change the tile. The server simply, actually the server ignores this altogether. As far as the server is concerned, it's always using tile 18. It never worries about it. But the server tells the client the direction and speed that the sprite is moving or the tile is moving. And the client will say, oh, this is a character tile, and I know that it's moving a particular speed in a particular direction, so I'm going to use these. So either, as far as the client's concerned, either it's moving or it's not. So if it's stationary, it'll use the stationary tiles. If it's moving, it'll be moving. And it picks the correct one to display. So there's a couple places you can see this if you actually want to see the code, and I'll just do that very briefly. If you go into the engine and you go look at the Tileset code, this is the code that loads the tile set. There's actually a subclass of that called the client tile set. So this is the subclass of tile set used by the client. And way deep in this code, you'll find something on how to handle a character tile. And now you'll see that, hey, if the tile object contains a direction key and it's of type and it's of type character, then I'm going to use a different tile. My effective tile number is actually going to change. And what this is doing is it's doing all the things we just talked about, and it's right before it displays that tile, it's picking the correct tile. And the same is true in this code actually for the animated tile. So if a tile is animated, it's making sure to use the correct tile. So that's all done in the client tileset.py. It's a nice short file. It's only 100 lines. If you want to go read more about how tiles are used by the client and how the effective tile number is selected, you can have a look at that code. All right, so that's character tiles. If you're going to do this, I certainly suggest you grab the chicken or the soldier and you just use that as your starting point, and just copy the things they have. There's nothing new to learn by trying to do it from scratch again. All right, so we talked about character tiles, talked about animate tiles. There's another important point, and that's anchor point. So let's talk, and this applies, again, mostly to sprites. You don't need to worry about this for other tile types. But when we think about a tile, and maybe I'll draw this first. So if we think about a tile, so let's say I've got my tile, and let's say it's a character tile. So in my case, it's 64 by 64. That's how big my tile is. And I've got my little, my character in there, which is a little person. Okay, so I've got my person. Now, there's several different parameters here. when I think about this. Now I'm going to get rid of 64 by 64. I just want to ignore that for a second. When this tile is being used in a game, and I'm actually going to talk about an object tile, and I'll get into all the details of that in a minute, but an object tile has its XY position on screen. It also has its width and its height. Now we just talked about that. In the case of a tile like this, it's going to be 64 by 64. There's one other point that we want, and this really, I'll cover a lot of this later, but there's one other point that we want, and that's what we call the anchor point. Now, for anything in tiled, the default anchor point is the middle. So if you just give me some random box, I'm just going to go, what's the middle? That's the anchor point. Now, what is this point used for? Whenever we move something in tiled, we move it by its anchor point. So in the case of a tile like this one with the little person that I want to move around, I'm not saying change its location by this. I'm changing its anchor point. Now its anchor point by default is the middle. So let's say that's about the middle of the tile. So does it make sense to set this character's position by kind of where their left arm is? Well, not really. That doesn't kind of make sense. The other thing the anchor point is used for is collision detection in some cases. And let's talk about that for a second. So if I go back to my game and I look at my character here, you'll notice that when I walk to the edge, his feet stop at the edge. I go over here, his feet stop. His nose kind of overhangs the edge a little bit. The same is true on this side. When I walk up to the cliff, and my game isn't perfect for the graphics, you notice that my head doesn't stop when it hits this boundary. My feet stop. So what I really want is my feet. My feet are what matter. So if I go up to this gate, you notice my head's already kind of on the door, but I haven't transported to the next map yet. I haven't gone through the map door yet. As my feet move up, my feet touch it. My feet go through. So what makes sense for this character, and actually for the chicken, and for a lot of different things that are characters, is that the anchor is actually the feet. So what we want to do is we want to say, hey, the anchor point is here. Now, let's suppose that that's slightly off center. So and I said this was 64 by 64 before. So let's say that my anchor point here, and my origin's always top left. Let's say that my anchor point here is something about 32, maybe it's 30 pixels. Whoops. Maybe it's 30 pixels by, I don't know, maybe that's 60. So maybe my anchor point for this is 30 by 60. So that's the location of that point. And that's the point that really matters for this. I don't care about anything else. I care about where the character's feet are, or the sprite's feet are, or the tile object's feet are in this case. So this anchor is important. Now, as I said, everything gets an anchor point automatically assigned by LAN-Caster as being the middle of whatever it is. But in this case, we want it to be the feet. So you can assign this anchor point a few different ways. You can again go in and do a property on each individual tile. Now, I was smart and I made my tile sheet only contain my character. Now, if I had a tile sheet that contained a whole bunch of different things, including character, I'd have to go into each character and assign its anchor point. Now, if you have animations, you want that anchor point to be the same anyways. Otherwise, things are going to jerk around. Things are going to be very strange. So when you're doing this, I recommend you follow this template, create a tile sheet that's like this, only one thing in it. And then you can go to the Tileset menu and do Tileset properties. And now I can set my anchor X. So again, it's just a property, and my anchor Y. So in this case, it's 32. It's dead center for left to right, and it's towards the bottom. And if I go back to GIMP and I look at this, so dead center is my anchor, and then tile, and then pixel about 60. So if I just get my cursor, I'm looking down here at the bottom left where my location will show up. And so at my cursor, 32, 60. Yeah, so just right in line with the bottom pixel where the heels of the character are, and dead center. That's the anchor point. So when this character is moving around, where his pixels, his arms, his feet are totally irrelevant to the game logic. The game logic cares where that anchor point is. That's the only thing that matters as far as the server is concerned and the game logic is concerned. It doesn't care about anything else. All the rest is decoration done by the client. So the anchor points is important to get right. You can always start with the anchor point being in the middle and just ignoring that, because LAN-Caster will automatically put the anchor point in the middle. But when you want to fine-tune things to make them look right, so your player stops at the right edges of things or other characters do, you want to set the anchor point. Okay, finally, I've talked a lot about using tiles on the map, tile layers and tile objects, or alluded to them. So let's just talk about what those are. So I've already done a quick demo of it. And again, in the maps, you will see much more of the how to make a map. But what we'll do here is just talk about objects. So in Tiled, there are tile layers and object layers. So I'm just on an object layer right now called Sprite. Now this is where you can take, and let me just grab a totally different tile I haven't used yet. Let's see here. I'm going to do something that I wouldn't normally do. Yeah, so I'm going to take a lever here. So I'm just going to take a lever. I'm going to put it down wherever I want. And with tile objects now, you can put them wherever you want, but they have to be on an object layer. And normally you're going to have things that are involved in the game on the sprites layer, because it's the main object layer that's visible that takes place in game logic. So you're probably on the sprite layer. Now, this is great. It doesn't do anything to actually show any nice graphics for the game. So I'm going to turn off the sprite layer, and we're going to look at a tile layer. So this is a tile layer. Now, the main difference with tile layers is tiles are aligned in a grid. Let me find my stamp tool here. If I am on a tile layer with grass, I want to be able to stamp. Yeah, perfect. So I can pick a tile from my tile layers. By the way, if you ever get lost, you can list them all here. So actually, I can go dungeon stairs. Let's put some stairs on this map. So I can. So this is a tile that is 64 by 64. So I can just put one of those down. Oh, sorry, it's not. It's 32 by. Aha. Let's go check. Let's go check this tile set. See how large it is. Oh yeah, it's 64 by 64. But I am trying to put this tile on a map that is 32 by 32. So let's just see how I do that. Right. Yeah. So this comes to how you layer and do transparency. This is more about the map topic. So maybe what I'll do is for now, know this can happen, but I'm just going to go to the dirt one here. So this is a tile set that's 32 by 32, and my map is set up to be 32 by 32 as well. And now I can just paint tiles. But you'll notice these tiles can't be just organized anywhere as they have to be specifically aligned on a grid. So let me just try and get a little bit. So that's a tile layer. That's how the tiles get used. You'll notice that all sorts of weird things are happening with the transparency here because this is my bottom layer and I messed it up. So, you know, your tiles will get used and layered with layers one on top of the other to create graphics. And I'll talk about that more in the map, as far as the map video, more about how to do that correctly. But just wanted to let you know, those are the two ways tiles get used. Tiles can be bigger. There's one example actually in the engine test, and let me run that for you. Oh, maybe I'll quit everything here. Can't run them both at once. So if we go into our engine test and quickly move to, oh, there it is, the horse. So this is a 128 by 128 pixel character tile. And again, it does all the same things you'd expect, but that's another example that you can look at. And if you want to see where that lives, that is going to be under source, under engine test, and under tile sets, you're going to see a golden horse.json, and under images, you will see a golden horse PNG that has all the components of the animated horse. And again, I'm not using all of them in that particular demonstration, but there's lots of horse options there. All right, so that's the basics of tile sets and what you need to do. There's a lot there to do as far as creativity. There's lots to learn about pixel art. I encourage you to Google and go look it up and enjoy it. It's a lot of fun. It can be tedious work, but it can also be very rewarding. All right, thank you.